This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. The night air was crisp and clear that October evening. At the base of a hill, a lone coyote's howl shattered the silence. From the dense timber along the muddy Verdigris River, 4 miles southeast of Nowata in the Cherokee Nation, an untamed strip of land in what is now northeastern Oklahoma, 5 riders burst into the open. They were the infamous Dalton Gang, Emmett, Bob, and Grat Dalton, along with Dick Broadwell and Bill Powers. Having gathered near Tulsa, some 80 miles to the south, they were en route to Coffeyville. Along the way, they had stopped at familiar hideouts they intended to use again if things went awry in Coffeyville. Their saddlebags sagged under the weight of $9,000 in gold and silver. By the following night, 4 of the gang would be dead, the 5th critically wounded, and their fortune in stolen gold and silver would have disappeared. The outlaws rode in pairs behind their leader, clad in new clothes with coat collars turned up against the biting night air. They were tall, hard-muscled men, each standing over 6 feet. Seated proudly in their ornate Mexican saddles purchased specifically for the bold endeavor ahead, they pressed forward. The early autumn moon bathed the landscape in a soft glow, illuminating deep gullies and sandstone ledges, allowing their fine horses to maintain a swift pace. The men remained silent until they reached a deeply rutted road, carved by the wheels of farmers' buggies and wagons. Here, they turned north toward Coffeyville, Kansas. "Let's keep moving," one of them called out. "Old Man Davis's place is up the road a couple of hours. We can camp there." Spurring their horses into a trot, they pressed forward. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, they reached their destination. They dismounted near a scrub oak thicket on the western bank of Onion Creek, securing their horses before gathering around a small fire for warmth. 2 of the gang rode to a nearby cornfield on the J.F. Savage farm, returning with fresh grain for the horses. As they boiled coffee, the firelight reflected off their finely crafted saddles, adorned with intricate carvings by master artisans from Old Mexico. The silver stirrups glistened in the flickering flames, and behind each saddle was a rolled slicker. Hair-covered saddle pockets, a hallmark of wealthy ranchers from south of the border, bulged with stolen riches loot from recent train and bank robberies across Indian Territory. Before dawn, those saddlebags would be emptied, their contents hidden somewhere along Onion Creek. In the years that followed, treasure hunters would scour the area, drawn by the legend of the gang's lost fortune. Yet, no one would ever find it. The Dalton Gang camped along Onion Creek on October 5, 1892. It would be their final camp. At the time, they were the most notorious outlaws in the West, feared for their brazen train robberies and occasional high-stakes bank heists. The rewards on their heads totaled thousands of dollars, and every lawman in the Southwest recognized their faces. Yet on this night, they were unconcerned about any posse creeping up on them. They were in high spirits, discussing their grand scheme, one destined to be the most daring in Western history. Their plan was unprecedented, robbing 2 banks at the same time. Even the legendary Jesse James had never attempted such a feat. Their targets were the First National Bank and C.M. Condon and Company's Bank in Coffeyville. They laughed as they finalized the details. By the next day, they would be legends one way or another. The operation was meticulously planned. Nothing had been overlooked, especially the escape route in case anything went awry. The hidden caches of money would fund their journey to the Mexican border. They did not anticipate trouble, but if events unfolded as expected, they would make their way to a designated rendezvous where Amos Burton, a black man, waited with a covered wagon. Disguised as women, they would board the wagon, and Burton would drive them south. The gang was aware that the citizens of Coffeyville had been expecting them for weeks. At one point, the town was teeming with lawmen from across Indian Territory. However, the bandits had received word that most marshals had grown weary of waiting and had left. Still, they knew there was always a chance something could go wrong. They did not discount the possibility of a gunfight. If one broke out, any survivors would retreat to their Onion Creek camp, where their hidden funds would secure their escape. Dirt-poor farmers in the area could be bribed to mislead any pursuing posse. Money went a long way in the Indian nations, where a day's wage was merely 50 cents. As the night deepened, the bandits spread their slickers near the fire and settled in for a few hours of sleep. With the first light of dawn, they rekindled the fire and prepared a simple breakfast of coffee, hard-boiled eggs, and fresh biscuits. Afterward, they carefully donned their disguises for their operation in Coffeyville. As the sun rose over the treetops, they saddled their horses. Around them, farm families were already hard at work, having been up since before daylight. As the Daltons mounted their horses, most farm families were sitting down for breakfast. However, a young girl, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. James Brown, had already saddled her mare and left home early. As she approached the wooden bridge spanning Onion Creek, she was startled to see 5 men riding out from beneath it. She stopped, watching as they galloped down the road, kicking up a trail of dust. Noticing their tracks coming from under the bridge, she briefly considered following them but ultimately decided against it. Years later, she would come to realize that had she pursued those tracks while they were fresh, she might have stumbled upon a hidden fortune. Around 9:30 a.m., the bandits rode into Coffeyville from the west. Moving casually through the streets, they halted near the home of Police Judge Munn, where they hitched their horses. Then, they proceeded on foot toward the 2 banks, their coats concealing their firearms. Their disguises were impeccable. No one recognized them. The next 15 minutes would become infamous. In a mere 12 minutes of gunfire, the townspeople, hiding behind whatever cover they could find, engaged in a bloody shootout with the outlaws inside the banks. 3 members of the gang were killed. Emmett Dalton, riddled with 23 bullets, was barely alive. Only Dick Broadwell managed to attempt an escape, but he was gunned down as he rode toward Onion Creek. He clung to his saddle for a quarter of a mile before finally collapsing. His loyal horse stopped and stood watch over his lifeless body. 4 of the gang lay dead, but they had managed to take the lives of 4 citizens and seriously wound 3 others. They had stolen over $20,000, yet every dollar was recovered. When the banks later tallied their funds, they found a slight surplus. Some extra money had apparently spilled from the bandits' pockets and was collected with the loot. Emmett Dalton, gravely wounded, learned of his comrades' fates. Realizing his own life was slipping away, he confessed that the gang had left Tulsa with around $9,000. However, he never disclosed what had become of it. Upon hearing of this sum, one local scoffed, "The Daltons never saw that much money in their damned lives." Many assumed Emmett was exaggerating. But at that moment, as he hovered between life and death, with the rest of his gang already gone, he had no reason to boast. If the money existed, its whereabouts remained a mystery. When the records are checked, there seems little doubt that he spoke the truth. In the few short months before the Coffeyville fiasco, the Daltons had committed robberies netting them well over $20,000. Only recently, they had robbed a Missouri, Kansas, and Texas train near Wagner, Oklahoma, taking $3,000. On July 15, 1892, they had stopped another MK&T train near Adair, taking a large sum that was never officially reported. The companies that were robbed were reluctant to disclose their losses, as admitting to large sums stolen by outlaws was damaging to their reputations. The week after the July 15th robbery, the Daltons strolled into a bank in El Reno, Oklahoma, where they surprised the banker's wife, who was alone at the time. Seeing their guns, she screamed and fainted. The Daltons proceeded to help themselves to more than $17,000, forcing the bank to close. Other smaller robberies were commonplace for the gang, and by the time of the Coffeyville robberies, they had at least $20,000 in their possession. In those days, that was a significant fortune. As far as can be determined, the only extravagant spending the bandits indulged in was on ornate Mexican saddles and a few flashy clothes purchased in the Osage Nation. There is no clear indication of what happened to the remainder of their plunder, aside from the $9,000 they carried with them from Tulsa. Most likely, the rest was buried somewhere between Tulsa and Coffeyville and remains undiscovered. The dead bandits were hastily buried in Elmwood Cemetery in Coffeyville. However, Their reported wealth led many citizens to second-guess the official accounts. Rumors circulated that large sums of money had been sewn into the linings of their clothing, and for a time, there was even talk of exhuming the bodies for further inspection. Emmett miraculously survived his wounds and was sentenced to life in prison. However, he was pardoned after 15 years behind bars. Upon his release, he was closely monitored, as many suspected he would attempt to retrieve the hidden caches. Instead, he chose to live an honest and peaceful life. Though he visited the vicinity of Onion Creek, there is no evidence that he ever returned to the site of the buried loot, likely for good reason. He knew that he would be followed or ambushed if he attempted to recover any treasure. Even after 15 years, many Coffeyville citizens still believed any surviving Dalton deserved to be hanged. Most researchers today believe that the largest share of the Dalton loot remains hidden around the Onion Creek camp. Other caches may have been stashed at locations where the gang camped between Tulsa and Coffeyville. It is highly probable that one such camp was a few miles southeast of Nowata, near Lightning Creek, just below the famed Cootie's Bluff. Another potential site could be near the old Coffeyville-Nowata Road on California Creek, north of Nowata. Modern metal detectors could prove invaluable in these areas. With determination and a bit of luck, one of the Dalton's caches might still be uncovered. Without a doubt, relics left by the gang would also be found, and even those would be valuable today. In fact, Dalton relics are now highly sought after by collectors, further fueling interest in the legendary lost loot of the infamous gang. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.